Hi, everybody. I'm an alcoholic, and my name is Bill. I really appreciate being asked to start, and if I have to be the first speaker, I'm glad that there's not 30,000 people watching me because it's been quite a while since I've been in front of any large group of Alcoholics Anonymous or any 12-step program. Um, my particular journey in recovery started off at another 12-step fellowship, and I'll start talking a little bit more specifically, but just in a general way. I am a child of the 70s. I did not want to be a drunk. I had everybody that I admired in my life was a hippie, and they all used drugs, and I thought it was totally cool to use drugs. But in my family, my parents, which again you'll hear a little bit about, um, never ending, kind of source of entertainment. My parents were alcoholic, and they were what is mistakenly called functioning alcoholics. They were people who both had very busy, trying jobs where they had lots of responsibility, and they drank every single day. I became my mom's bartender in second grade, for instance, because by that age I could tell that the poor woman needed a flippin' drink. And so I wanted to help her be able to do the cooking and all the stuff that even working women have to do. And so of course I became her bartender. I mean, what else would a loving child do? Um, but what I want to stress is the commonality that we share. This was normal. My life seemed entirely normal to me. I never thought that anything that was happening around me was unusual. I basically assumed that everybody lived like we live. And so with that kind of outlook on life, I made friends, and all my friends, my mom's whole salary went to pay for a private school, so I got to go to school with a bunch of rich kids, and we weren't rich at all. And those rich kids were, a lot of them were in the boarding school part of my school, and they had horseback riding and all kinds of stuff that regular kids didn't get. But they also got to carry around these flasks, and they almost all the boys had hip flasks. And this was in the, I don't know, mid 60s, late 60s, as I was just maybe in first and second grade myself. And so it was pretty common for me to be able to drink off of another kid's flask as we would play baseball, or we would throw a football around or bounce a basketball. And so again, that seemed normal to me. They didn't hide it. The adults around were not paying attention. I mean, as an adult that raised kids, I get now that we were not well supervised, but at the time it seemed like we were pretty, everybody was looking over our shoulders. Um, and so I had alcohol at school available to me. And later on, those same kids, the faces changed, but they were still part of that same school crowd, the rich kids, as I called them. They were, by the 70s, they were all the kids that were on TV shows, the Brady Bunch kids, the Partridge Family kids. All of these kids went to my school or another school called Buckley that was in that same area of Los Angeles. And so we all knew each other. I got invited over to these kids' homes, and some of them were really grand. They were pretty fancy with maids and everything. And every single one of those kids had big brothers and sisters who were using drugs. And so it was just a part of going over to have a sleepover to smoke pot or use cocaine or whatever was the big kids had. And they would abuse us and make fun of us, and we would stagger and fall down and vomit on them and pee on their carpets and whatnot. But in essence, that was what was my reality growing up. Meanwhile, at home, my mom and dad were trying to have regular lives. My mom worked in a newspaper in Los Angeles. And about 6 months before she passed away, she said, you know, Billy, the thing that I am most proud of in my entire life, next to you, of course, I'm an only child, right? But she said the thing that she was most proud of is that she never had to sleep with a man in order to get a promotion. And she ended up being the first manager in a major newspaper west of the Mississippi. And she helped build that newspaper to such an extent that the Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times were trying to buy the newspaper. And she won awards for her circulation and promotion campaigns at the newspaper. And she ran with the big dogs in Los Angeles. And so she went to lunches that were 3 martini lunches with the boys, and she came home a little tipsy, and we would drive across the valley in the 120-degree weather in bumper to bumper traffic and go home. And that's the way my mom came home. Meanwhile, my dad was in the shower. It was the way we said it. And really what happened was dad came home at about 4 o'clock because he went to work he was an engineer at the city of Los Angeles. And he would start work at 7 a.m. and get off around 4-ish. And he'd be home all relaxed and poofing his face, you know, with baby powder or whatever, as mom and I were coming in, and mom was sweating bullets and cussing up a storm because of all the other drivers and needing a drink, really. And so dad would disappear back into the bathroom. Okay, out of sight, out of mind. I'll show you guys. I'll avoid the situation. Now, I learned later that my dad had an experience in the Second World War. He was young toward the end of the war. And after the invasion of Europe, they called my dad up, and they had been teaching him how to speak German, and he was an engineer, and they put him in what they call the Fighting Corps of Engineers in the US Army. And his job became to be part of different platoons, because as it turns out, the mortality rate was so high for these particular platoons that dad kept seeing new people every time. They would, like every few days, they would push you out of an airplane behind enemy lines. And when you hit the ground, the idea was that you would flee as fast as possible back to the US Army and map a route for the next period of days for the tanks and the infantry and all the trucks and stuff to come. And so dad would go out with these 15 guys. They would split up almost immediately into 3 teams, and dad and his team of, so the total of 5, would start mapping. And dad was wondering, and until a book came out, he never knew that out of all those people, 45 people, about 80% of them died. And dad just kept going back, just like it was normal for my dad. But that left him a little bit of a lunatic. And he was very shy and introspective. One night when I was 2 years old, he was asleep in the chair, and I went in to tell him goodnight. And he was asleep, and I jumped up into his lap and gave him a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. And he literally stood up, opened up his eyes really wide, and threw me across the room. And I flat out landed hard on the wall about 15 feet away. And dad saw what he had done and screamed, literally, and ran into the bedroom and slammed the door, locking the door. And I'm running, little 2-year-old Billy running down the hallway after his dad, pounding on the door. Dad, are you okay? And shortly after that, my dad quit drinking. And that was the first time that I know of that my dad quit drinking. He also started taking some pills that would put him into a deeper sleep so that it was hard for me to wake him up. And again, to me, that was normal. It was normal to depend on alcohol and drugs for things. Mom would mellow out after a double, triple cocktail or 2, and she would start cooking dinner, and I'd do my homework at the little bar in the kitchen dining room area. And we would watch black and white TV, and we got to see Charlie Manson get arrested. And I said, oh, look, mommy, they're squeaky, because these hippies had been down at the 7-Eleven stores, and they were brand new at the time out in the west end of the San Fernando Valley. And these were the people that I was hanging out with as a kid. And my mom and dad never really understood the fact that I was doing these abnormal things, thinking that they were normal. Mom and dad worked hard. They loved me. There's no doubt that they loved me. My alcoholic parents abused me in several different ways, but that's only a part of the story. The longer that I'm in AA, the more I realize that my selfishness and self-centeredness as a little kid set me up for failure as an adult, because I kept looking at myself as the center of the universe. I did not see myself as a member of a family. I saw myself as like the star of a movie. A lot of times I'll talk about the difference between Clint Eastwood movies and John Wayne movies, as dumb as that sounds. And the way I related to that as a kid that became important to me in recovery is that John Wayne would go get his buddies, and then they'd all ride and they'd kill the bad guys. Whereas Clint Eastwood, the bad stuff was happening, and he'd appear out of the fog, all by himself with his top hat, his top large hat, and he'd ride into town and kill everybody, and then ride out of town with a little blood dripping off his foot or something. And I wanted to be Clint Eastwood. From a very young age, I didn't want to be around people that much. I liked my friends. I liked being able to kind of control what my exposure to them was. If they came over for a sleepover, we had a great time. I lived in a great area that was kind of a mixture of subdivisions, and that, like you would see on those TV shows. But also we were out at the very west end of the San Fernando Valley. And in those days, there were still ranches and orchards surrounding us. And there was still a very large ranch that became a park, where it was a working ranch, and we could go and hang out in the orange groves. And so I had a great childhood, but it didn't seem that way to me. There was always something else that was coming along with me. It wasn't just happy-go-lucky kids playing army out in the streets. There was always something else. And until I came to recovery, and until I started taking my inventory, I never realized that my whole attitude and outlook on life was very self-centered. It was. And it was like I seemed to be, and I remember even arguing this at one point in 5th grade, as one of those kids, that I am the center of the universe, because wherever I look, I can turn in a 360-degree angle, and I'm in the middle. I'm always at the center of the circle when I turn around. And I got into a big argument with the teacher, and the teacher finally let me win the argument, of course, because the teacher didn't, the teacher was a nice person as opposed to me. And I needed to be right. I needed to be right. Now, I got kicked out of class for it, but the teacher ended up saying I was right, and I felt really good about that. I thought that was a good thing. And so that's the way I started to live my life more and more. I would climb out the window of my room to go running over to my friend's house when they weren't sleeping over with me. I ended up having friends sneak into my bedroom. My mom got so she didn't know who would be in my bedroom if she woke us up. I just basically did my own thing. And my parents were just barely able to cope. What happened was, in high school, I started going out with the boys, and those guys purposely wanted to see how much liquor they could drink, and they weren't so much into the drugs. I played guitar. I was in a couple bands with older kids, and I loved that. I did, and I loved using drugs with them. But that to me was partying, and I never wanted to drink. because my parents drank and they were not nice when they got drunk. So I had all these feelings about liquor and not really wanting to have that much to do with it. And so the boys would spend a couple hours getting alcohol because, of course, we were all, 10th, 11th graders. And they didn't think we should have alcohol. Anyway, whatever, those foolish people, those adults. But we spent a lot of time hunting for the alcohol or the drugs. But in the end, we always got them, and we always were doing our thing, and we had some adventures. To me, the important thing to share to other people is that if it had been bad from the get-go, I really don't think I would have drank my way into becoming an alcoholic. Clearly, I have the alcoholic gene in my family, but a genetic, weakness doesn't mean that you're going to start using the substances. And it was the fact that I purposely used alcohol and drugs that led me to become reliant upon alcohol and drugs. And then, just like the old saying, the man takes a drink takes another drink, and then the drink takes the man. I got taken by the alcohol and the drugs. I also had asthma, and I had asthma really, really bad, to the point where I would be on the ground, unable to get up or lift my head, and people would actually have to lift me up on the ground, off the ground. I was taken to the hospital 3 or 4 times a month during the summer. And so for me, it was, and of course at the hospital, they would give you these shots. And the shot would literally, the doctor would come over sometimes at night and give me a shot in bed. And I would literally end up, arching my back straight up in the air with only the back of my head and the back of my ankles touching the bed, because the epinephrine that he gave me hit me so hard. And so I came to love that effect too. I played sports. I was good at sports, but I got injured because I was a big kid, I was strong, and so they always put me with the older kids. And yes, I held my own, but I also got injured. And the doctor would say, "Oh, don't worry, let me give you some pills here to take for a few days and you'll be fine. Just don't work out, give it a rest for a day or two." And of course, I never did that. I was a catcher playing baseball, and I ended up getting hit 5 times. I had 5 concussions before I graduated high school, but I was being watched for professional baseball as a catcher. I mean, how dumbass. But I would not manage my life in a way that didn't continue to expose me to all these different consequences. And I always had a good attitude that, oh, this time I'll make it. This time will be great. When in fact, I would crash and burn almost every time. And so the same year that I got Athlete of the Year and Scholar Athlete awards at my public high school, I also got hurt playing football, and I couldn't walk for more than a year. And they gave me all kinds of pain relievers and all the good ones in those days. And I became terribly addicted. They did that on purpose to me. They also helped me taper off and titrate off. Meanwhile, I didn't count drinking liquor as having anything to do with that. So I was still partying with my friends. So time went on, and in college, I did great in college. But me and my buddies would always drink liquor in the afternoon, and we would always smoke pot in the evening to end our day. And it became just sort of part of life. And they are not alcoholics or addicts now. I know them all. And those 5 guys are still, just regular human beings. Some of them are hard drinkers, I think, but none of them are alcoholics, and none of them, I don't think they're alcoholics, and they certainly don't either. I'm the lucky guy. I'm the lucky guy. Because more and more, what happened to me was everything I did, I needed the beer can between my legs as I was driving. as I was doing things, I needed the pills. I was anticipating that my leg would hurt or my back would hurt. I've got lasting nerve damage. And so I'm susceptible to that kind of stuff, kind of like a, the pinched nerves kind of thing. And so I would just take drugs in anticipation of needing drugs 4 or 6 hours later. And that became a normal way of life. I married the great cheerleader kind of girl that was 5'11", and we started having babies, and Audrey was also an alcoholic. I know that now. She has not found AA, and so I say she's alcoholic only because of our experience together, and she admitted to me that she feels certain she's an alcoholic and she has no intention of doing anything about it, and we can all rot in hell if we want her to change. And our 3 children are still terribly conflicted about their mom, but they also learned, because I started dying in front of their eyes. My wife couldn't have the kids, so I became a full-time dad. I graduated law school, became a career courtroom litigator. I was in the courtroom every day, in jail every day, going to prisons on the weekend to try to help my clients that were still appealing things or whatever they were up to. And then I was raising these 3 kids on my own. I went as far as you could go in my job as a deputy public defender. They even created a new level for me. And so they raised me up as high as I could go. But the 2 guys in my office, it was a fairly small office in a small rural county up in Northern California. And the 2 guys that were the bosses were young and they weren't going to retire for 20 years. And so I got maxed out. So I became a little pissed about going to work every day. I was a single dad with 3 kids, a wife that was nuts, but who wanted to try to keep getting back together. And what I started doing was drinking every night after work. And I started driving home drunk every night at the end of the drinking. And on nights when I had a babysitter, that was fine. But I started not showing up for my kids for dinner. And I would come home late and they would be hungry, pissed, scared for me because where's dad? And it was not a pleasant thing. And my reaction to that was to drink more. It wasn't to drink less. It was to drink more, take more pills, try to avoid the pain, because God knows I work hard for a living, and I work hard as a dad, and I don't get a break. And what's wrong? How come I don't get a break? What the hell is wrong with you? And so the intolerable condition of state of body and mind started on purpose. I purposely made up my mind to, for now, temporarily rely on alcohol and drugs. I went to the doctor, who was my friend. And Alex said, "Bill, I know your wife. I know your job. I know you. This is a small town. Here, let me write you these pills." And he gave me these little peachy colored pills. And a couple months later, he made an appointment for me to come back in and tell him how it was going. And I said, "Well, that good, except there's not enough of those pills." And so he said, "Well, really, here, let me give you these blue ones." And he gave me these blue ones, and we went from 30 a month, eventually up to 180 a month. And so the thing is, this was a man who is a trained doctor. He's a good doctor. And yet I lied to him. He was my friend, and I lied. I took advantage of him. I manipulated him. And Alex went along because he believed I needed relief. And he knew how to give me relief his way. And so he gave me relief in the only way he knew, which is to write prescriptions and tell me, "Well, change your job. I know what you do for a living, and it's a good living. But, Bill, those are some of the craziest, most violent people in the county that you work with. And because you're good at it, those are the ones they give you. And so you come home all stressed out. Why don't you consider changing your job? And I said, but Alex, I can't, because the family is here, everybody's here. The kids don't want to change schools. And he said, that's okay. That's okay. I understand. Go to counseling. So the counseling, of course, had a different pill eventually that he gave me because I was having sleeping problems. And I started getting another prescription pill to, help me get by. And so I began managing my life in this way where I mushed together alcohol, drugs, exercise. I played racquetball to the point of needing an operation because I popped my knee, of course. And I wouldn't do things halfway. And so, where it had taken me a year to learn how to walk after my football injury, I now had a racquetball injury on the other knee. And it took me another 6 months to learn how to walk again, and 6 months of being addicted to pain pills. And so little by more, I thought being addicted to pills is no big deal. Jesus, all you got to do is sweat for a few days and it's all good. What's the problem with opiates? I don't get it. I thought, all of this stuff, it's just so crazy. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says somebody like me, the way that I think about alcohol and alcoholism is plain insanity. They don't say I have a little obsession of the mind. The big book says I am obviously, plainly insane. And the reason that I've been boring you with all these stories about growing up and everything is because I want you to hear that you can have degrees, you can be licensed by the state and federal government to do your job. Everybody can be looking over your shoulder. They can require you to take, continuing education. I teach continuing education. And you can still be plainly insane when it comes to your thinking about alcohol and alcoholism, or drugs and drug addiction, or eating and food addiction, or cocaine and cocaine addiction. It just doesn't matter. It's all bells and whistles because I need it. I need a break because the world and its people are loud, bright, shiny, distracting, and they hurt. This world flipping hurts. And I need relief from that. And there's something about the way my mind works, my brain works, my biology works, genetics, I don't know, a combination of all that, probably. Yeah, probably, because I fell into that trap. And in the end, I finally needed to come do something about it. And I had all these clients that had been the most dangerous people in the county. They had been in prison, some of them for 20 or 30 years of their lives. They were now in their 50s or 60s, and they were clean and sober. It was that group of felons. I call them the felons. So it was that group of felons that tried to carry the message of hope and recovery to me, because they could see what my doctor couldn't see, what my children lived, but they never could put words to because they were little kids. They saw the truth. They saw through my bullshit, and they knew that I was dying. And so finally I started coming to meetings, and they said, Bill, what about AA or NA? It's the only two, we only have two 12-step fellowships for substance abuse here in town, NA and AA. Marijuana Anonymous has never caught on, and you got to go down the hill for anything else. Here we had those two. We had two actually large AA fellowships with 30 or 40 meetings a week, and one large NA fellowship with probably 8 or 9 other groups holding meetings off and on during the week. And I didn't want to be a drunk, you guys. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. So I said, well, let me go to NA. Let me get the message of NA. And the truth for me, and we're all a little bit different, but the truth for me is that from my very first meeting in 12-step recovery, which was at NA, I was listening for the differences and I was listening for the way out. And I found a million ways out in the NA literature and in their sharing. Just one example, a guy I knew for 18 years at that point was a meth freak. And he was talking about how he could drink liquor now because it's not his drug of choice. And it's been 5 years since his last use of methamphetamine, and everybody clapped. And I thought, oh, shoot, you mean I've never used meth. I had never used meth. So I thought, oh shit, as long as I don't drink liquor, that means I can use meth. Is that okay? That was my best thinking. That's what you can do when you have a lot of degrees and you graduate summa, magna cum, whatever it is. How insane. But that's the attitude I brought with me to recovery. Clearly I had a problem. I knew I had a problem. So why bother coming to NA or AA in my case, if you're not gonna do what they want you to do about it? So I don't hold a grudge or anything against NA because it's not their fault. It's me. I'm the one that was sick. They're not sick. The only reason that NA or AA exists, or any of these 12-step fellowships, only exist to try to help a guy like me. But how do you tell a guy like me, dude, you're powerless, you're killing yourself? When I don't get arrested, I keep going to work, I keep taking the pills to mellow me out so that I don't punch you out at work. And I keep going home and I tell myself, I'm doing fine. I'm a little edgy, but I'm doing fine. I got it. I got it. I'm good. I wasn't good. I wasn't good at all. And so I developed this thing for about 3 years when I first came to 12-step recovery, where if I was drinking, I'd go to NA. And if I was taking drugs and hooked on drugs, I'd go to AA. And I didn't feel like I needed to raise my hand. And a few of the members bought into that crap, and they knew it and they laughed about it. And they were very disrespectful about it, both AA and NA. And so that was the group of people that I hung with. But there were also some great long timers. And the long timers were trying to tell me, Bill, you're getting worse. You're getting worse. Have you considered taking the steps? And so the steps became an interesting thing to me. And I started reading the Big Book for Meaning in AA. And I had basically already gotten to know the Golden Green and all that stuff. And I argued against it. So I had to do that same process in AA, of course. And I spent 5 years in AA focusing on the steps. I had memorized the Big Book. The first 103 pages of the Big Book, basically I got it rattling around up in my head all the time. But did I apply it in my own life? Oh, hell no. It was all philosophy. It sounded good. Let's talk about this deeply. Let's do deep dives. And then I'd go home and drink. I'd have great conversations with you guys. I wasn't doing it. I would go home, drink, take drugs, pass out, and get up and go to work the next day and then hit the 5:30 meeting. I thought I was in recovery. Just couldn't stay sober or straight. And so little by more, it became apparent to me that I was getting worse. So what good was being in recovery? And I started to ask some of the long timers, what is this with, this whole not drinking thing? How do you quit drinking? And it was amazing the answers I got. Some long timers said, Bill, you just have to stop. Other long timers said, Bill, you have to just do the best you can. And other long timers said, well, Bill, have you ever sat down with the Big Book and taken the steps out of the Big Book just using that one volume? And I said, oh no, dude, I've had temporary sponsors in both fellowships. They had me get Hazelden pamphlets. They had me get this book called The Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps, that if you've ever seen that, it's 1,200 pages long, full of fill in the blanks and little check boxes and all kinds of true false questions put out by Hazelden. And I said, I filled that whole thing in. I did all 1,200 pages, and I did most of it drunk at night after work. And they said, well, Bill, it's not about filling in blanks. It's about applying these principles in your life. Have you done that? And finally, I came back one more time in September of 2004. And I woke up, I had been on a 9-month drunk, is the way I say it. I had taken a half a gallon of liquor every single day and mixed it with 10 to 20 pills each day. And I was still alive, but just barely, just barely. I was passing out in front of my kids. They were thinking I was dead, I mean, all kinds of wacky stories that we all can share about the pitiful life we all have led. And today I don't really think those are funny stories. I think I live among a certain group of alcoholics and addicts who are the ones that die. If you survive and if you get time in either of these two fellowships in my area, you've had to do an awful lot of work and you've had to change an awful lot. And these hillbillies up here, I'm a big city boy still at heart, and the hillbillies up here where I live, they don't know any other way of life. They don't know. And so what happens here is that the fellowship and the fellowshipping becomes so important, because you get exposed to guys you used to drink with, or guys that used to teach you in school, or guys that used to be your lawyer. And you get to a point where you say, what did you do, man? What, you seem so happy. You weren't even happy like this 20 or 30 years ago. What did you do? And today I get to say I finally sat down with Roger, that the big book thumper guy over there, the guy, and just like Scott Redmond was we ended up being good friends. But Scott Redmond always talked about the guy named Clem, who had the big, huge belt buckle about the size of a dinner plate. And he would wear a little bolo tie, and he would come walking up to Scott with just a big book in his hand. And I thought Scott was serious and telling a literal story. And so I finally told him about Roger. And he got the biggest kick out of it because that was all made up. But that's who Roger is. And he finally got to meet Roger. I'm glad those two met. So I finally didn't know what else to do because I could not stop drinking. My drinking had gotten bad. I'd been able to cut back temporarily on some of the pills I was taking because my blood pressure was off the hook. They kept wanting to hospitalize me whenever I got around a doctor's office, and I needed to go around a doctor's office. And so my step one journey really began with Roger, the big book thumper, sitting down with me, coming back after a 9-month drunk. And this time my eyes would not focus because I had so much sugar damage from sugar, all the sugar and liquor, and my whole family's diabetic. And I guess I got alcoholism, but not diabetes, thank God. And so I was unable to read the big book. Roger said, Bill, just sit there. I'll read it to you. And he would read a page, and I didn't remember what he had started off reading when he got to the end of the page and wanted to talk about it. So Roger, who is one of the most sarcastic people you'll ever meet in your entire life, began reading me the big book one paragraph at a time and discussing it paragraph by paragraph. And when we got to a place where the big book says, we did this, we did that, we would do it. And Roger would do it right along with me. And I was taking the steps with Roger in a completely different way than I had ever taken them during my 6 years of being around you people. And finally, I got to the point where I was sitting in a meeting one day at lunch, and my buddy Ranger Dan, who had a drunk bicycling case, and I mean, he came to AA and struggled worse than I did, but he got sober 6 months before me, that guy. He was telling his story about going to a wedding and just drinking because everybody else was making a toast, and how cunning, baffling, and powerful his mind is, because his mind made it okay for him to drink. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, Dan, the drunken bicyclist. You know, when I was a kid, I used to ride a tricycle around in my backyard, drinking off my dad's rum and coke. Wow, I've been relying on alcohol an awful lot of my life. Wow, what a trip. Maybe I'm really an alcoholic. And that day, I not only realized finally forever that I am an alcoholic, but I also realized that I was a recovered alcoholic as a result of taking the steps. I had no fear of liquor. I realized finally it's not about the alcohol or the drugs. It's about your peace of mind. It's about that serenity stuff that those long timers talk about till you're ready to throw up. It turns out that there is a different way to live your life. And so for me, my journey in the steps has really kind of been different than a lot of people because I was a chronic relapser. People thought I was going to die. They stayed away from me. They were polite and nice, but they knew I was toxic. So they kept their sponsees away from me. And here I was finally recovered. And Roger made me take step 2 the old fashioned way. He said, let's look in the big book. And on page 47, it says, dude, Bill, it's written to me, Bill Walker. Bill, you only have to ask yourself one short question, dude. You don't have to work out a whole theology. You don't have to seek any God. You don't have to seek any person, thing, principle. You just have to ask yourself one simple question. And if you can say that you either believe that there's any power out there that can relieve your alcoholism, or if you're willing to believe it, then we emphatically assure you that you're on your way. And Roger said, Bill, look, dude, I don't even know what you are. I am Baptist. I do not believe like you believe. I don't ever want to hear the word God out of your mouth again until I say it's okay. You are going to start seeking power that you lack. You get to figure out along the way what, if any, source of that power you want to call it. I don't care. I don't even want to know. I just want you to take the step and move on to step 3. And step 3, Roger showed me, says something entirely different than I thought. I thought step 3 was about 3 frogs on a log and whether you jump or you just say you're going to jump and never jump, the failure to launch thing or whatever. But it really starts off by saying, first of all, you got to quit playing God because you're screwing it up. You can't create a world of your own making. You can't create the perfect world. You've got to learn, dude, how to live in this world. And so I could take step 3 finally, quit playing God. I didn't have to know who God is. I didn't have to have a whole theology of different kinds of sins and what happens to you if you commit one of those sins. I didn't have to learn Vespers. I didn't have to learn any of that stuff. I had to quit playing God. And then I had to realize that the way I live my life, those relationships, my demands that I put on you and me and everybody, including God, all those demands make you guys think I'm stepping on your toes and I'm trying to push you around. And that helped me a lot because by that time I was finally screaming at my kids. I hadn't been up till then, but by that time I was, because they wouldn't do it right. And if only they would behave, then this place would be a whole lot better. And I wouldn't have to be drinking myself to death after all. So it's really my kids' fault. And the minute I went there, I thought, oh my God, this is that. Oh my God, that was shocking to me. So I knew when Roger was talking about stepping on people's toes and the way I make them feel like I'm trying to get them to do stuff, I finally understood I am blocking myself from recovery by being a stubborn a-hole that is going to do things his way no matter what. I needed to follow directions. Was I willing to? This time I was. And so Roger was like almost in tears. He was so happy because I asked the very next question. Knowing the big book, but being very sick at that time, I said, how do I do that, Roger? How do I turn my will and my life over to God? And he said, Bill, in AA, it's really super simple. You just take the next step. There's no drama. You're the guy creating the drama, dude. It's just take the next step. Always, the answer is take the next step. So I could finally write my inventory. And he helped me. I mean, the big book has great directions for inventory, but if you're a sick alcoholic, it doesn't make sense. I work with a lot of guys now who are chronic relapsers, and those guys, they know the big book better than I do, a lot of them. They really do. But they don't know how to follow the directions because their mind stops them. Our mind is still insane. We just learned that the way we think about alcohol and alcoholism is plain insanity. And then we take step 4 and we prove it. We want to talk about what they did to us. We don't want to focus so much on what we do about that and how we screw ourselves time and time again. We miss out on loving intimacy. We miss out on some great jobs because we walk away because they piss us off so much. We miss out on fellowshipping because we're scared of these people. All of those things were true with me, all of them. And the guys that I get to work with are the guys that I only did it for 5 or 6 years, y'all. There are some guys that I work with that have done it for 20 or 30 years, in and out, in and out. It's tough. It's exhausting being an alcoholic or an addict. It's really exhausting. For a guy like me, going to recovery is the start of a whole new way of life that I know nothing about. I know how to do my life my way, but I don't know how to do my life AA's way or NA's way, 12-step way. I need help. And so Roger helped me start writing my 4th step. And we went through those pages line by line by line. And then at the end, Roger did something that nobody else had done with me up until that point. We got to the point where the big book says, in this way, we tried to form a sane and sound ideal toward which to grow. And the big book says that in the context of what a lot of people call the sex review or the sex inventory. But what the big book says at that point is, in other words, we treat sex just like we treat any other problem. And Roger said, they mean any other problem, Bill, like your resentments and your fears, you idiot. It's all the same. Because you're trying to control your way out of your anger. You're trying to control your way out of the fear. You're trying to convince yourself you shouldn't be guilty or ashamed. But you've done some stuff that you should be ashamed of, Bill. So we're not going to lie. No lies. No lies. You're going to take the steps. So treat sex like you do all your problems and write a sane and sound ideal toward which to grow. And this was a thing I do a lot with guys that especially have failed so much in recovery. I'll ask them to write that out. And a lot of times I end up having to sit with them and write it out too, because it's all so new to them. But then at the end, we'll read it together and I'll go, now, does this seem sane to you? Does this seem like something you want to grow toward? And I'll always ask them the same thing. How long do you think it'll take before you get to be pretty much this way and live in your life? And they'll swear, they always say, I don't know, ever, 10 years, 20 years or whatever. I always write it down on the bottom. And then I keep that. And I always give it to them on their 12-month anniversary, their first year that they go without drinking or taking drugs. And we always read it together. And invariably, so this is one of those invariably things in recovery, invariably they burst into tears and start weeping because they have sold themselves short. They have never shot the moon one time They always give themselves maybe 2 inches of growth, and they look back and they see that they've grown 5 miles. They've gone miles. So we continue on in the steps, and you say, basically, are you ready to change? Would you like to change the way you live your life? You've seen how you screw yourself. We've connected those dots. Are you ready to seek the power that you lack to change? And that becomes step 6. And step 7 is where I promise not to try to direct my recovery. I promise not to direct the power. I promise to let the power change me however the power is going to change me. I mean, I wanted a girlfriend. My wife and I had split up. She has borderline personality disorder. She decided I'm a bad guy. She'll never talk to me like a real human being again. And so in the end, I was stuck alone raising 3 kids. And after 11 years, I thought, well, it might be kind of nice to date a little. But the thought of inflicting myself on a woman because my picker is broke. I mean, how many of you, especially the men, have heard my picker's broke? I don't want to date. Are you nuts? I don't want to have anything to do with women. That's over with. And that was me. And it was the long-timer women who took me aside, and they wouldn't let me indulge in that kind of craziness. They said, Bill, you're absolutely nuts. You love women. You love friends. They're friends. You've got all kinds of women friends. We know them. We've gotten to know you. We know you pretty good. Don't be an idiot. Date. And so I had to learn how to date sober, which I had also learned I had never done in my entire life. They got me into Al-Anon. And I'm glad, because I knew absolutely nothing about how to have sober relationships. And in Al-Anon, those people do. And so to this day, I love listening in Al-Anon meetings. I mean, I need NA, I need AA. But I've also learned that I need Al-Anon too, because I am the child of alcoholics. Their craziness seemed normal to me growing up. And so the question becomes, how much change do you want in your life? You know, our friend Mark Houston used to say, how free do you want to be? How free do you want to be? I just wanted to not drink a half a gallon of liquor a day, but I sold myself short. I had the best relationship I've ever had in my whole life with a woman for 11 years until she stopped doing what we need to keep doing. And then I reacted to her reaction to my reaction to her reaction, and we just blew it all up. And it's so sad. I'm still having a rough time 2 years later because I focus on what I lost. I don't focus on what I gained. I don't focus on the good. I focus on the bad. And that is still an ongoing shortcoming and defect that I still pray about a lot and catch myself doing a lot. 8 and 9 turned out to be really pretty easy also. I had made the mistake, I'll say, of listening to Joe and Charlie tapes. And Joe and Charlie tell you to rank your amends. You know, rank them in 3 columns, and then there are people in my fellowship that were using 5 columns. The ones you'll do now, the ones you'll do later, the ones you'll never do. And of course, I did 2 or 3 of the easy ones, and then my sponsor would say, well, I want you to do one of the hard ones. And I would go, but I don't want to do a hard one. And I wouldn't do any more amends. I'm carrying them with me. I got my list. I keep it in my wallet. And there was a guy in my fellowship who proudly would share that he'd kept his unmade amends on a paper in his wallet for 18 years. And I said, well, if Jim does it that way, then why can't I? Well, the difference is because I'm not that kind of alcoholic. I'm the kind of alcoholic that drinks over their unmade amends, just like Dr. Bob. But I didn't think about it. I didn't think I was like that. I thought I was cool. And so in the end, what I learned with Roger's help and another sponsor, my next sponsor was Victoria, and she helped me an awful lot with this, is that if you take step 8, then step 9 is a piece of cake. Because step 8 says you've got to be willing to make amends to them all. And then step 9 is where it says you make amends. So the big book looks at those 2 steps together, because in theory it should be I'll say this, any man in his right mind, me, I think I'm a man and I think I'm in my right mind, would do 1 step at a time. The big book said, let's look at these 2 together. And it assumes that if you're in your right mind, you want to make your amends. See, but I didn't. I wasn't in my right mind. I still had some leftover mind of a chronic alcoholic. I thought maybe there's a way I can avoid this. So I started listening hard in meetings to stories about how I think I did a crime and so I can't make amends. The statute of limitations hasn't run. Oh, well, that person's dead. I don't need to make amends. Oh, well, I was afraid I would have to make amends, but he just up and died. That was a guy with 30 years said that. So I would write this stuff down. I have notebooks full of bullshit. But in the end, Roger just sat me down and Victoria helped. I prayed item by item until I thought, Jesus, God, okay, I've had enough. Okay, I'll make the amends. That's how I became willing. I didn't become willing as in eager. I became willing as in knock on the door. And so I got to complete my 9th step amends. And somewhere in there and early on, Roger said, okay, the big book says we began this new way of life as we cleaned up the past. And so now it's time, Bill, for you to start practicing steps 10, 11, and 12 every single day. So little by little, I took step 10. I continued to watch myself for a couple weeks. And during that period of time, I would watch myself, take mental note, and then Roger had me write it down and tell him whenever I noticed that I was selfish or being dishonest or having an anger, resentment, or being afraid or freaked out. It was just that simple, y'all. That was my inventory. My inventory stopped being columns and writing in step 4. It became what the big book says to do, which is to continue to watch yourself and take immediate action. And that was week 3 of step 10. Week 3 of step 10 began, say a prayer. God, please change me. Holy smokes, I want to change. This is not what I want to be. This is not who I want this is not who I want to be. This is not what I want to do. I need help. I need God's help in step 10, 11, and 12, because my sponsor has a life. He's going to go sponsor other guys and help them become recovered. I now have to become responsible for my spiritual program of action and my life and my relationships. And so Roger was essentially training me, just like the big book suggests, step by step by step. This little ignorant man who still just, he digs on me because he loves me. He had me put step 10 to work in my life. I learned the easiest thing to do, and this is what I try to get guys to do that I get to work with. The easiest thing to do is right in the moment when I start getting angry and I start feeling like I'm not breathing, I'm tense, I'm uptight, I'm starting to raise my voice. The stuff in my head starts talking to me. Right then and there, if I pause, so I know I'm borrowing from step 11, which is eventually what you do. If I pause and go, oh my God, I hear me, I heard that. I have a chance right in that moment with that person to say, you know what, I'm sorry, I was getting off. Maybe I don't understand. Maybe, I don't need to be that way. This is not, life and death. Can we start over? And in making that observation, I can easily add a few words like, I'm sorry, I'm growing. You know what, I'm learning how not to be petty and vindictive and shitty. Using those kinds of words with people de-escalates them. And all of a sudden you realize, if you're in my line of work, there's nothing to argue about. There's no point. What are you arguing for? You do that in court in front of a judge or a jury or something. You don't argue, with, the DA or the client or whatever. What's the point of that? So all of those people in AA or any 12-step fellowship that says, how important is it really? I thought that was BS until I started to live it. And then I heard the term, how important is it really? And I thought, oh my God, that's me. I've become one of them. So, a lot of recovery for me is once the drink problem is gone, once the drug problem is gone, what am I going to do next? And it's what I'm talking about now. It's growing an understanding of spirituality and how to live these new relationships. It's growing in effectiveness in how to live in a spiritual context where I'm not going to my ego. My ego has a lot of muscles because I grew up on my ego. I got awards. I got straight A's on my ego. I did good in sports on my ego. I could get a girlfriend on my ego. I couldn't keep her on my ego, but I could get her. And I would just get another one. I didn't care. I care now. I care now because I want to see how good this new spiritual way of living can be. And it gets good. It gets great. A year after when I took my first year, my only first year chip, God willing, I argued a case in front of the California Supreme Court, and then 3 months later, they said I won. I won my point. I freed a person. That was me. I did that with your help. The only reason I could do that is because of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and 12-step recovery. Because you guys took me by the hand and you led me to a whole new and better way of living. And I have no idea where I'm at on time, so you guys got to help me out a little bit here somewhere.
You're good.
I live today in steps 10, 11, and 12 as a way of life. I start every day just centering myself in bed. Sometimes I'll sit up because, again, I have had asthma and allergies all my life, and I get sick. So I sit up, and as I'm coughing and hacking and clearing my throat, I'm really also just taking a minute to take a breath and go, I do not need to know where the half-gallon jug is. Where is the handle? I don't need to do that today. Well, thank God I don't need those. I didn't lay out those 5 pills to start my day with out over in the bathroom. I'm okay. Today's a good day. It's already a good day. And then I get to consider my plans for the day. And, in my case, I'm still working. I'm coming to the end of my work career, thank God. And I'm going to retire later this year. And I'm looking forward to travel and doing all that cool stuff that I've never been able to do during this time. My kids are grown. None of them so far have this drink and drugging issue. They all have flamin' Al-Anon issues, but they don't, they're not drinking over it. They're not taking drugs over the misery that they create in their own life. And instead they talk together. We do a Zoom call every week. And that ends up being 3 or 4 hours a week where I dragged them to Al-Anon for, 6 months or 9 months or whatever. And none of them wanted to stay going. My daughter still goes to Al-Anon sometimes and talks down in Los Angeles because she lives the program, but she's not like an everyday member like I need to be of AA or NA. And so these kids get on the phone and they all start talking about their life and their problems. And all of a sudden I start hearing 12-step recovery coming out of their little mouths. And I go, where did you guys get that from? And if I say that out loud, somebody will say, Daddy, we went to AA meetings with you for that first 2 years that you stayed sober. Don't you remember? I say, well, yeah, that's because I didn't have babysitters and I needed you to go. And they said, well, did you think we weren't listening, Daddy? This is my 30-year-old boys. And my 32-year-old daughter has broken up twice with very nice, one guy was an alcoholic and one guy was an addict because she can't do it. She wouldn't do it. I love Alcoholics Anonymous today, you guys. But beyond that, what lies underneath AA is 12-step recovery. And there are more than 250 12-step recovery fellowships handling all kinds of different problems today for a very good reason. My buddy Alex, he and I traveled around California for 3 years giving presentations to medical personnel about drug-seeking behaviors and how a doctor can get in over their heads trying to help their patients. I'm asked to talk in our drug court and our alcohol court in this county. And I do that for the staff, but I don't do that for the larger community because I am pretty well known in our community. But do you hear? I'm well known in the community today. I'm alive today. I am the man I am today because of you, because of people like you who have also taken 12 steps, put them to work in your own life, and are busy applying them, more or less, in all your daily affairs. I need reminders. I need to keep growing. I need to help other alcoholics who are just as hopeless as I was recover. I mean, those guys, they are the ones I usually get to work with. They are not the 20-year-olds that are coming to recovery for the first time. They're the 50 or 60-year-old guys that you got to go wake up under the bush and you get to know which shoe has the hole in it. And so that's your guy. It's not the one sleeping next to him on the other side of the bush. Those are my peeps. When you guys talk about your peeps, I get to work with those guys and girls. So the thing is, I need fellowship to be the mouth of God, to be the only hands that God has on this planet. We can do so much to help each other in so many different ways. We can't keep each other sober or clean, but we can do a whole heck of a lot for each other that really makes a difference. And so I'm very appreciative of that. And how am I doing, Steve?
You can wrap it up. I mean, or whichever you want to do.
Yeah, you guys have been very polite, and usually, and I'm not used to doing 1-hour talks anymore. What I want to just close with is that if you have not taken the steps with a sponsor who is knowledgeable, the big book says who has had the experience themselves, but more than that, you want the experience to not just be a generic spiritual awakening. You want to know that they have already done what they're going to help you do. I walk with those that I sponsor. I do not lecture to them. I don't tell them what to do. I no longer use handouts, for which they're all very grateful. I use the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you want to take the steps with me and you want to use the green, I'm down. If you want to do that in Al-Anon, I'm down. I'm up. I want to help. So I'll work with you no matter what fellowship you're in. But the thing is, what we're going to do is we're going to talk you through the process so that you do it yourself. And I will walk with you as you do that. And I'm only there to put stuff in context. Roger, Victoria, those first two sponsors were a blessing. I mean, I had been sponsored by others, but those two guys were a real blessing because they stuck to the book. Victoria loves the 12 and 12. And so she focused with me on the 12 and 12, but kept kicking my butt back into the big book because I obviously had some holes. And because they both kept my nose in the literature of the fellowship, I learned how to apply what AA gives us for free and for fun, a program of recovery. I learned how to apply NA's version, let's say, of the 12 steps, which really, same 12 steps. I learned how to apply Al-Anon, same 12 steps. So That's my recovery world, basically those 3 fellowships, because I live in a small rural area of Northern California tucked up in the gold rush country. But, just because you have choices to go to doesn't mean that you can't check them out. Step 11 says use other good spiritual books to grow. And I have so much fun using those other books, whether they're from AA or NA or CA. I mean, not CA, but MA has pamphlets, HA has stuff. There is, the OA has a lot of stuff. There are so many good sources of helpful hints, so to speak, to help put 12-step recovery into context, that if you need help, it's available. You have 250 choices for 12-step fellowships. I hope you find one that works for you. Thanks, Steve, for the opportunity, and thanks all you guys for being so polite. Thank you very much.